in many ways today, knowing too much about a thing is actually worse than not knowing enough. And these days, I think we all know too much. Because when we become aware of all of the reasons why we shouldn't do something, we often don't do that thing. There's a new section that I just wrote for the book, and this is the final net new section. So I just came back from a full 4 days in isolation writing. And it's one of those things that sounds exotic. Writer goes away by himself. No internet, no nothing. And sits and writes, and then genius comes out. It's actually a miserable experience. And so it's not something that I enjoy doing, but it's something that I feel is necessary. So I left my family for 4 days. I went to Allison's family's cottage by myself. No internet, no nothing. I actually forgot my jacket and my wallet at home. So I couldn't even go outside or go grocery shopping. So I ate like basically frozen chicken nuggets the entire time. I had a couple vegetables. But I was proud of the work that I produced. And this was the final net new section that I needed to produce for the book. And the working title of it is Remain Optimistically Ignorant. And you'll see what I mean. This section is about ignorance and ignorance being a good thing. But it's also about learning and skill acquisition and what you should learn and my process and framework for learning. Before I get into that, you might notice that I sound different.
Oh, man.
Just a little.
About a month ago, I finally bought a new microphone. Because everybody was complaining about the sound quality on this podcast. And so I finally bought a new microphone. Amber helped me. I bought like a really nice, expensive microphone. My neighbor came over, who's an audiovisual guy, helped me set it up because I'm completely clueless. And the sound somehow on this podcast got worse. And I had no idea why. It was awful. For the last 3 weeks, it's been awful. And I'm really sorry about that. And I had no idea why. And it was one of those problems that I just kept putting off because I just didn't want to deal with it. Because I'm like, I've got 4 fucking cameras. I don't know how to use any of them. None of them are hooked up. I'm using the webcam on my computer. I finally buy a new microphone and get a neighbor to help me set it up. And it's an expensive one. And the sound is worse. So fuck this, I'm just going to talk, and if people don't like it, I'm just going to write words. And I finally got so frustrated listening to my own podcast at how hard it was to listen to that I actually Googled what to do if it sounds like your sound is far away with this microphone. And the first thing that came up was, there's a dot on the front of the microphone. Make sure that the microphone is turned towards you, and you're speaking into the side with the dot. So I look at my microphone.
Oh, man.
And then I look at the back of my microphone. And I notice that the dot is on the other side. So what has been happening?
Oh, man.
So what has been happening this entire time is I've been speaking into this very expensive microphone that's been turned backwards. And so my voice was bouncing off of the window at the back of my office into the microphone backwards. Hence the shitty sound. So if you're wondering why I sound so much better now than I did before, it's because I turned the microphone... It's because I turned the microphone towards me. And I'm actually speaking into the microphone in the way it's supposed to be oriented.
Oh, backdoor Johnny.
Oh, my.
Just going to ignore that one.
Yep. Trying really hard. So there's this thing about unconscious competency, right? Ties into this. Everybody's well, this is just so obvious. Nobody would pay me to do whatever, right? Because this is just so obvious, right? I mean, I think we can all agree John is really fucking smart and is great at a lot of things. But sometimes there are things that we struggle with, right? And we need other people where this feels like an obvious thing to them. So go ahead and put out whatever service you have if you're nervous about it, because there's somebody that will pull the mic backwards thing and need you.
Oh man, the USB.
Here's what I have to say about optimistic ignorance.
Can't stop.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Turn your microphones around the right way.
Oh, man, I'm tired.
I was 24 years old when I published my first book. For those of you who don't know, it's a guide for personal trainers called Ignite the Fire. I'd only been full-time in the gym for 3 years at this point. Nothing about writing that book at such a young age was audacious. Nothing about it was courageous. The truth is that I knew so little about all of the reasons why I shouldn't have written that book that I wrote that damn book. Here's how it happened. Every day I'd carry a clipboard while I trained my clients with 2 items on it. One was their workout programs, and the other was a blank piece of paper on the back of the clipboard that had observations on it. On that blank piece of paper, there were notes. Some of the examples that I just pulled from way back then were, client told me they had pain bench pressing. Picked up a piece of garbage. Another trainer instructed deadlifts wrong. Dangerous? Intervene? Question mark. Have a crush on the secretary. Got stopped by a member wanting to buy sessions. Have a crush on the secretary happened a few times. It was a bit of a problem. We went through a few secretaries at that gym. Got stopped by a member wanting to buy sessions. And so on. This was as simple as I did it. Like, I'm with my client, but anytime that I did anything, or if I'm just like walking through the gym or whatever, anytime that I did anything, I just jotted down a bullet point as simple as that often on the back of this piece of paper. And then at night, I'd review my day by expanding on each point, and I'd add details and thoughts. In some cases, I'd call friends, I'd ask what they'd done in similar situations. Right? I wasn't trying to write a book. I want to make that very clear. I was trying to learn by cataloging and reflecting on my day's events. After about a year of doing this, I showed this document to my mom. It wasn't a Google Doc because at that time there were no Google Docs. It was just like a big, like massive Word document. And it was large. It was around 100,000 words. Because small daily actions add up really fast over time. She said that it could be a book and that there's a lot of interesting material in it, but I needed an editor. Now keep in mind, I was a personal trainer with a kinesiology degree. I didn't know any editors, let alone anybody who had ever written a book. But instead of being overwhelmed by book publishing, I focused on figuring out the next step. Not on purpose, though. I'm creating a post-rational narrative here. The process was undoubtedly messier than how I'm describing it because at the time, the only thing that I knew was that editors are involved in books and bookstores had books. So I went to the bookstore. And in that bookstore, there was a shelf of best-selling health and fitness books. So I wrote down the names of the authors, went home, and sent emails to as many of them as I could, asking for an introduction to their editor. Almost everyone replied, many of them made introductions, and I ended up hiring Kelly James Anger because she told me that the ideas were good, but the book was not, and that it needed a lot of work, and I like honesty. Once the book was edited, Kelly said that I now needed a copy editor to fix grammar, spelling, and formatting. I didn't know that that was a thing, but I guess it makes sense that it's a thing. Kelly introduced me to a copy editor, then I got the cover designed and book printed and so on. Book stuff. This was 2009. There were no hybrid book-in-a-box publishers or marketplaces of reliable outsourced help. Didn't exist. If you wanted something done, you needed to mash together a random smattering of contractors, and those contractors could be hard to find. When I think about that period of my life, I can best define myself as being optimistically ignorant. That's a way of saying that I was clueless. but like in a good way. If you wanted to do something back then, you figured it out. Or you didn't. And you didn't do the thing. We were all mostly blind, mostly making it up as we went. As a result, everything was pretty new and exciting. You had a binary choice to take something seriously or not back then. None of this wishy-washy in-between stuff. These days, it's too easy to do a bad job with all of the tools and tutorials freely available. Now, I know we can't go back in time, and I also know that there's more opportunity for everybody now, but still, a part of me gets pretty nostalgic thinking about that period of my life. Ignorance kept me going. I didn't know what I didn't know, but I gained confidence knowing that I could always figure out the next step. It seemed less daunting. As I solved one problem, the next one became clear. It's like when you're driving on the highway and it's pitch black and you have your high beams on. You know you've got miles to go, you know that there's going to be twists and turns, but all you can see right now is what's directly ahead of you, so you focus on that. As you continue to drive, new stretches of road light up until you approach your destination. Optimistic ignorance is kind of like that. Ignite the Fire has sold over 70,000 copies to date. I wrote it a long, long time ago, and I'm proud of it. But I sometimes wonder whether I'd be able to do it if I was 24 years old today. And honestly, I don't think so. It's impossible to not be an informed pessimist right now. The reasons why it's hard or a bad idea or why somebody else is better suited than you are to do the job. We second guess ourselves not because we don't know enough, but because we know too much. Did you know that the reason why we have grassy front lawns is because in the 1300s, medieval kings planted it as a way to show off their wealth? According to the historian Yuval Noah Harari, grass was the perfect status symbol. It produces nothing of value, needs a lot of land, and requires a lot of costly labor to maintain. Keep in mind, this was before sprinklers and lawnmowers. We don't need to show off our wealth with grass anymore. We have social media for that. For some reason, though, this status symbol outlasted all of the monarchies that built it. Personally, I don't have a problem with grass, but it's interesting to learn that our obsession with it is nothing more than a remnant of the past that really only exists because people kept copying one another until nobody really knew why they were growing grass but figured there had to be a reason, so kept doing it. I guess what I'm saying is that copying others is an inevitable byproduct of constant exposure. If I were 24 and considering publishing a book today, I'd be discouraged by how many people were already saying what I wanted to say online. Not because my ideas were original before, but because now it's impossible for me not to notice that they aren't original. If I was able to overcome that self-defeating narrative, I'd look up how to self-publish a book. Like Alice, I'd fall down the rabbit hole of podcast episodes, YouTube videos, and social media posts, and the overwhelm would be paralyzing. Knowing too much about a thing is often worse than not knowing enough. All of the information we can access in our pockets is more often a crutch than a support. Too often, the result of spending all of our time collecting new information leaves us pessimistically informed. When we become aware of all of the reasons why we shouldn't do something, we often don't. Informed pessimism isn't something that can be avoided. It's an inevitable byproduct of an information economy. Instead, it's something we need to overcome. The first step is to accept that others are more qualified than you, which is totally fine. I'm going to pause there because the next section starts going into, first, why you need to accept that others are more qualified than you, and then we get into the specific skills that actually are going to make a difference and a process for learning them. But I didn't think that I was going to tell that story. And I was trying to figure out a way to get into this. And I was looking for stories from other people, because often that's what I do when I'm writing this book, is I look through a lot of books and analogies and stuff like that and look for stories as a way to like get into and frame a concept that I want to talk about. And then I thought, when was a time when I knew so little about a thing that I just kept doing the thing? And it was probably the most important, easily the most important project that I've ever taken on in my life, which was Ignite. What do you guys think about that story? It was pretty meaningful to me when I was writing it. I wrote a lot. Like this section is probably about 1,000 words. I probably wrote about 3,500 and really pared it down and tried to say only what needed to be in the story and then pull it back. I call it, or Jason, my buddy Jason calls it bricks and mortar. Like basically like the bricks is the story, the mortar is why it matters to somebody else. And you just go brick, mortar, brick, mortar, brick, mortar. So you can tell that I'm trying to do that in here where I'm telling my story and then I take it a step back and say, okay, here's why this matters to you. And then you go back into the story and then back and forth. So, but yeah, what were you going to say, Ryan?
I was going to say two things came to mind while you were telling that story. Number one is that I just had this conversation in one of our groups. I don't know, Online Trainers United Online, something.
Something with a terrible, really stupidly clear name, but yeah.
It's like Online Trainers Online or something like that. In any case, I don't know why you do that, John, but we all get it. You're busy.
I do that because I don't know not to turn my microphone in the right goddamn direction. That's why I do that.
Man can't find a dot on his mic.
People give me far too much credit. Go on.
It's the best story ever, by the way. I hope it finds its way into whatever the next thing is you do, because it's such a great story, man.
When I told you guys that for everybody listening, when I told Ren and Amber this in our Facebook chat for the podcast, Amber's response was priceless. It was just like, that is the best thing you have ever said to me.
Awesome. It's just an awesome story. I mean, it speaks to this in kind of a way. I mean, you're on podcast number 275, not to mention the 6,000 ones that you've been on as a guest, not to mention yada yada. I mean, it's just an amazing. Right. In any case, there was a guy in a group today asking about recording his videos, right? For his, I'm concerned that I'm not recording my own videos of myself or my clients. This speaks to that so eloquently, because in 2013, when you're doing 1K extra, in 2014, when I've not met you yet and I'm an online trainer, I didn't know to care about it, right? I'm just ignorant to the fact that anybody would give a shit who was explaining the video. But I also love this allegory in music, because it's, for those that don't know, it's the 50th year anniversary of hip hop. And I've had a debate with a few people about why hip hop music, etc., seemed so good in the 90s. And it was because so many artists were ignorant to the business. So you got cheated so badly in the business. When you signed a record deal, you made practically no money, so you had to be great at performance to even out your finances. Yeah. You had to be so good on stage back then that people got word of mouth spread about your show. And that's why newer artists, with all the advent of knowledge and being able to do a complete album on your computer, they don't have that optimistic ignorance to know that we're going to get screwed on this record deal. We better learn how to perform real quick, and that's going to sustain us as classic artists. You talk about a Will Smith, however you feel about him. When he gets on stage, you get a great show, right? Yeah. Versus Lil Yachty. I'm sorry, John. Yachty.
Yachty.
I'm sorry. I keep pronouncing it incorrectly.
It's like when I was teaching Calvin how to say Hanukkah. I'm like, no, Calvin, comes in here. Hanukkah.
Oh, a little Yachty. How do you feel about the new Lulz rappers? They're not that great when you go see them in concert. It's just, they don't have to be. So I love this story about optimistic ignorance. And there was sort of an age where there was an innocence of invention. Yeah. And we've lost the innocence of invention now.
And I don't think it's possible to get it back. No, I don't think it's possible to get it back. I want to respond to that. I'd love to hear from you, Amber, too, because I know that you were nodding a fair bit, but you and I have spoken about this kind of process a bunch as well over the years. But I want to respond to that a little bit, Ren, because I think it's such an apt point that you made. The entertainment industry is very much an outlier industry, first and foremost. But at the same time, it's not dissimilar from a number of other industries, and I'm going to get into this with the next part of this section that I'm going to get into after we finish this kind of interlude, where the best entertainers are very rarely actually the most successful. And it also has to do with their trappings and their surroundings. There's this really famous video, Social Experiment, where Joshua something, I can't remember, the most well-known successful violinist, I think it was, in the world. And so there's this guy who will sell out Madison Square Gardens, and he's playing this violin that is a $2 million violin. And he's playing in the subway station by Madison Square Gardens as a busker, and nobody stops. And then the same guy that night is selling out Madison Square Gardens at like hundreds of dollars a ticket. And so do we really know, do the majority of people really know how to judge? So on one hand, entertainment is an outlier industry where a few people are going to have massive amounts of success. On the other hand, in this day and age, there's actually opportunity for a lot more people in entertainment, which are probably not in entertainment if you're listening to this podcast, but even in entertainment, there's opportunity for a lot more people than ever before, and they don't have to be as skilled. There was a podcast episode that I listened to a while back with this guy who's basically this like TikTok rapper. And he's kind of reinventing how the music industry works. What he's doing is he owns all of his music himself. And he's like, actually, getting paid per stream can be really profitable as long as you don't need to give all of it to your record company.
Yes.
You get something like $1,000 every million streams or something like that. I can't remember what the number is from Spotify, but then you mix in YouTube, then you mix in everything else. And then you mix into that various types of merch. And he's like, I'm not even touring because it doesn't make sense. I make way more money basically creating TikToks that push people to my streams. And what he has is his girlfriend is basically this marketing genius. And he was a child actor in addition to being a inarguably mediocre rapper. But he does these skits on TikTok that go bonkers and push people to his Spotify. And as a result, he's making like tens of millions of dollars a year as a rapper, basically from his basement.
Right.
And I share that because it's actually a great example of what I'm going to get into, of understanding that there is a level of diminishing returns when it comes to industry-specific skill sets. And you have to recognize that, and you have to understand how to complement those skills with other things. And I'm going to get into that in a minute, but I thought that what you said, Ren, was a great example there. Amber, do you have I'd love to hear from you on this if there's any. I mean, you don't have to, but I'd love to hear from you if there's anything to add.
What I think about is when I was doing online coaching and building out programs, and my favorite part is the creative side, like not figuring out how to help them lose weight or whatever. That's fun, but like the joy comes from all of the trappings that kind of go with it, and on purpose, because I know I am easily influenced, and that like shiny object syndrome if I see someone else doing it or whatever. So I purposely closed off. I unfollowed all of the other coaches. I unfollowed everything that I thought would influence me so I could maintain that optimistic ignorance. Because otherwise it ruins my creativity.
Was that a comparison thing or was it a creative thing?
It's both. It makes me second guess myself. If everyone's doing this, but I'm thinking this, am I wrong? And right. In reality, that's what made what I had to offer so wonderful. And so having to get rid of all of that noise and stay in my own little bubble so I didn't play the comparison game and ruin the creativity that went into it just made it so much better. And I feel like I tell our students that all the time when they're like, well, I could be doing this, or I feel like I should be doing that. I'm like, turn it all off. Unfollow everyone. Stop listening to things that are crowding your ability to think.
Yeah.
And do, what you do best, because you lose your voice otherwise.
That's such a great point. There's a big difference between incremental and exponential gains. And I think when you're following industry norms, when you're trying to when you're obsessively trying to get better at the stuff that your industry is supposed to do, the best you can hope for is incremental gains. And that's fine to a point, but it probably won't get you where you want to go. I want to continue with this, or else we're not going to get through it because this is like a 3,500 word section. We might not get through it today. We can do a part 2 of this, but I want to avoid that if possible. I don't know. Do you guys mind part 2s? I don't. Yeah.
No problem.
Alright, well, we'll see what happens. You guys know this story already, but I used it in a new way. The story is called Water and Oil Don't Mix. My roommate almost burned down our house in college. He wanted to fry potatoes, so put an inch of oil in the pan and turned the heat on. Then he smoked a joint and fell asleep. By the time I got there, the flames were a foot high. I carried the fiery pan to the driveway and dumped water on it. Water and oil don't mix. The water closest to the fire gets vaporized, becomes airborne, and pushes the oil away. That's a fancy way of saying that pouring a bucket of water onto a grease fire turns it into a fucking fireball. My dumb ass didn't know this at the time. Imagine you're a firefighter, and it's your first day on the job. The alarm goes off, you arrive at the house to see a pan on fire. You turn off the heat source and spray a dry chemical fire extinguisher. Once the fire's out, you tell the family that if it happens again, to pour on baking soda, cover it with a metal pot, and turn off the heat, allowing it to self-suffocate from a lack of oxygen. Then you kiss a baby, pose shirtless for a calendar, and do whatever else I imagine firefighters do. So in a group of experienced firefighters, you're a newbie. Compared to them, you feel like an imposter. But you knew not to put water on the grease fire. So sure, you might get laughed at by other firefighters, but nobody you helped cared. You put out the fire. Don't let your perceived inexperience, lack of impressive specs, or any other inadequacy compared to your peers stop you. In almost every case, the necessary methodology to solve a customer's problem isn't complicated. How likely are you to check where your financial advisor went to school or what their grades were? I've never done it. My confidence in his ability has nothing to do with how well he did as a business student. Do you ever wonder why some nutrition coaches do very well while others barely make a living? Successful nutrition coaches don't necessarily know more about the Krebs cycle than other nutrition coaches. Most people just need to eat a bit less protein and a lot less crap. The Total Blender Classic from Blendtec has a powerful 1,560 watt motor. A blender from another company, Ninja, only has a 900 watt motor. What does that mean? I have no goddamn idea. I have, however, owned both, and both of them make an equally good smoothie. Here's a challenging question. Are you learning because it will meaningfully affect your customer's outcome, or are you learning because it's personally interesting to you? Many ambitious people struggle because they're too narrowly focused on their field, obsessing over minute details. Getting better at things we're already good at feels good, it's comfortable. In many ways, it's also selfish. The selfless approach, and the way to become the obvious choice, is to recognize when you're good enough to solve the core problem and complement your industry expertise with other valuable skills. Now, don't misconstrue this as permission to coast in your profession. Always strive to learn to improve. Just know that not all personal development is equal. Some skills have incremental value gains, while others lead to exponential growth. When 1 + 1 = 10, industry-specific knowledge has a surprisingly low point of diminishing returns. I'm ignoring the outlier cases that involve the best in the world. Take me, for example. I was a highly successful personal trainer with a basically okay knowledge of fitness and a decent understanding of psychology. But what I had that most people in my industry didn't was a mediocre ability to write and sell. If you were to assess my talent in any of those things independent of one another, I'd be low to mid-tier. The combination of them was rare, and as a result, my market value raised dramatically. Now flash forward to today, and I consider myself to be a pretty good writer who also happens to have a solid all-around business background, a good understanding of psychology, and mediocre skill sets in money management, public speaking, and product development. There are better writers, more experienced business people, and better psychologists. The rare element that I bring to the table is a combination of three. Value rarely relies on expertise, but in range. The most interesting shit that's happening in any field is not any field, says Rory Sutherland, the vice chairman of Ogilvy UK. It's actually in the interplay between different fields. There's a small incremental benefit to improving a good enough skill set. Call it 1 + 1 = 2. When you begin adding outside skills, though, growth becomes exponential. 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2 anymore. It equals 10. That's obviously not an accurate calculation, but it's a useful simplification. Success-wise, according to the cartoonist Scott Adams, you're better off being good at 2 complementary skills than being excellent at 1. Both strategies work. You can work very hard to become truly great at one thing, or you can combine multiple skills. The advantages of combining skills is that they can be learned quickly because none of them need to be high level or depend on extraordinary talent, and their versatility can help you adapt to an evolving world. Obviously, not all skills are created equal. Juggling knives is cool. So is domesticating feral kittens, but those won't help you much, unless you do them at the same time. I'd pay to watch that. So let's first talk about which skills are the most valuable to learn, and then how to learn them. I'll take a sip of water.
You deserve a sip of water after comparing juggling knives to herding feral cats, Sean. That made me thirsty.
Domesticating, not herding.
I'm sorry. I'm not paying attention. I don't have any Twizzlers today. And your voice is so silky smooth and alluring.
Is it really that good?
I'm distracted, yeah. I was like, when did Morgan Freeman take over the podcast here? It's like that million dollar narration here.
If you ever think you're far away from where you want to one day get to, just remember it might be as simple as turning the goddamn microphone around.
Look for the dot, Carol Ann.
All you need to do sometimes is look for the big dot that says
I feel like that's a good title.
What's that?
Look for the dot. Yep.
I want a sticker that says mouth here on your microphone.
Oh my God.
You're welcome, listeners.
Amber, I would like that sticker. I would very much like that sticker to arrive at my house, Amber.
So noted. That's a dangerous ask, but I will make it happen.
Okay, leapfrog skills. So I've identified the top 5 leapfrog skills. These are timeless. Advancements in technology might make them easier to implement, but won't render them less valuable. They help you jump forward in single big movements. Leapfrog skills are also transferable. They can be combined with any industry expertise to make you more valuable. With them, you'll have an advantage in any entrepreneurial venture or become indispensable to your employer, allowing you to command a higher salary. If you change careers, you take them with you. That's a big point. Here's the 5 leapfrog skills and a bit about them. The first one is business writing. Write simply, hook the reader, tell a story, get to the point, and offer actionable takeaways. The second is behavioral psychology. Learn to recognize and work with the major cognitive biases. The third is conversation. You'll be more interesting once you become more interested. It's never about you. The fourth is sales. The way to get what you want is to help others get what they want. And number 5 is wealth management. It's easiest to make money with money. Even a little bit of money is enough money to make meaningful money with patience. The following is a good guideline for how the most successful people in their fields focus their professional development over time. Year 1, you want to be about 75% on industry skills and 25% on leapfrog skills. Year 2, you want to be about 50-50 industry skills to leapfrog skills. Year 3 onwards, you want to be about 25% industry skills, 75% leapfrog skills. Every industry is a different baseline level of knowledge required for results, so your ratio might be a bit off from the above. Though if it is, it's probably not much. And finally, leapfrog learning. Focus is the key to skill acquisition in a world determined to distract us. Nothing's new about that advice, though. You hear it all the time. Focus more, the art of focus. The secret to success is to be more focused, they say. Well, how do you decide on your focus? Then, how the fuck do you stay focused? So I have a framework called leapfrog learning. There's 2 parts to it. Number 1, limit learning to 60-day sprints. Point 2 is to teach it. I'll explain the first using a principle from fitness called homeostasis. Building a strong body takes a lot of initial effort. Maintaining a strong body is relatively easy. Part of the reason why is that you embed good habits when you exercise, but there's a physiological reason too. Skeletal muscle cells are multinucleated. When you build muscle, your body also deposits additional nuclei into the muscle cell. If you stop working out, your muscles shrink. But the DNA for growing muscle, the nuclei, remain. This is why it's so annoying when your neighbor, Booty Band Betty, indulges in pie and cake and doesn't turn into big old Booty Betty. And if she were to get out of shape, she'd get back at it quickly. Yeah, I know. Annoying. When people put in the dedicated work one time, they can put up with a lot more than others can. The body finds comfort and stability around a homeostatic set point. Once it's set, there's a bit of fluctuation, but not much. The goal of training is to reset your body's normal to a higher level of functioning, best done through relatively short, probably about 8 to 12 weeks, periods of dedicated, consistent, and reliably progressive intensity. I've grossly oversimplified this physiological process. My kinesiology friends are going to have a conniption on it, but I hope that you get the point. Oversimplified examples might be bad for science, but they often make for useful analogies. Leapfrog learning takes the same homeostatic set point principle from physiology and applies it to skill acquisition. The best way to stack skills is to choose one at a time and focus 60 days of dedicated effort into it. So why 60 days? It's because it's long enough to develop a mediocre level of skill, yet short enough to feel doable. Once you learn a skill, having it becomes your new normal. Like building muscles or riding a bike, if you don't use it for a while, it'll get rusty but comes back. Now on to the second part of leapfrog learning, which is teaching it. A lot of your work will include listening and reading, and that's where most people stop. Hopefully you'll apply it as you go, but if you take that skill set, according to the Australian motivational speaker Vin Gain, and go and teach it to somebody else, that's where you attain 90% of it. The best way to learn is to teach. 90% isn't scientific. Whether it's technically accurate or not isn't as important as the pattern, and in my experience, the pattern is true. So long as there's a 60-day dedicated period of study and an element of teaching, you're good to go. So here's 3 examples of leapfrog learning. You get better at social media by choosing one platform to master, listening to podcasts, reading blog posts, and studying the top accounts. After 60 days, build a slide deck, invite 3 friends over, feed them pizza, and present what you've learned. Build your personal wealth management philosophy by studying topics like greed and envy, interviewing financial advisors, reading books about investing, and listening to case studies where knowledgeable people share honestly what they do with their own money. After 60 days, teach a loved one about your philosophy or record a podcast episode about it, which I did, which we'll share to you. You can listen to next if you want. Figure out what to do about artificial intelligence. Ooh, scary. Wait, Halloween's over. Ooh. By reading books and listening to experts speak about how it's going to redefine job roles, skill requirements in the future. Once done, compile a report for your industry and send it to 5 colleagues. I also did this, and I also recorded a podcast episode on it. It's not necessary to always be in a focused learning period. Most of the time, it's not going to be possible. But what's useful about focus is that a little bit of it goes a long way. Every time you do a leapfrog period, you'll find yourself not just a little bit ahead of where you were previously, but a lot. That's all I got on this.
It's pretty good. I enjoyed it.
I've done a lot of the learn and then teach method, my entire life. Yeah.
Just about to say that.
Give me an example. I'd love an example, Amber. Yeah, I'd love an example, Amber, because I'd love to maybe improve. Like, I only want 3 examples in the book, but I could easily improve on those 3 examples.
Yeah, so like in the TBR group that I have, because I want to geek out with other people about business and marketing books, and it's a joke group, right? Like everybody buys all the business and marketing books. Don't always get through them, but when you do, you want someone to talk to about it that's going to be excited. And so I had finished a book about onboarding I had picked up for Quick Coach, and instead of saying, hey, buy this book, I'm distilling it down into different pieces to teach into the group. So that way I can learn how to better communicate it and also distill my own thoughts about it. and look at ways to apply it. Because it's the book I read, Onboarding Matters, is meant for SaaS, but how else can we look at it that, you know, for different industries, and then we can also pull that back into SaaS, right? And so like it goes, you know, back and forth that way. You know, so if I were to apply the principles in Onboarding Matters for a hairstylist, for example, what would that look like? And because there are differences, could I actually use that in SaaS that might improve it, but we never thought about it that way?
That's a really smart way to bolster understanding of something. To really, I don't know how I would use that element in the book, but that's a brilliant method of bolstering understanding as you're learning, is to not just teach it, but try to figure out another circumstance outside of the constraints of the book or what you're initially learning that thing for, and apply what you've learned and teach it as it pertains to another completely distinctly different instance.
Mm-hmm.
That's
what's
smart.
fun for me, is the thought experiment. You know, if I was going to take this thing, what would it look like here? And that's the fun of it for me. And so, you know, I have a friend that's a hairstylist. I have friends that are massage therapists and, you know, dog walkers and whatever. And talking to them like, okay, here's the thing that I just learned. What do you think? You know, do you see how you could apply this? And we have a discussion about it, and it's just fun. But then it cements it so much better in my own mind.
I mean, this entire podcast is basically designed for me to learn better and faster. Like that's the primary reason. Now there's a secondary benefit, probably a tertiary benefit as well. Marketing, nurturing, conversation, all of that. But it's basically a way for me to speak and get feedback as I'm speaking, verbal and nonverbal feedback as I'm speaking on the ideas. It also is a way to force me to prepare material in a way that I can present it. Holy shit. It's hard to do. And it's particularly hard to keep up with. But once it becomes normalized, it's like, oh, I'm exponentially better now at learning and writing because I know that I have to present these things. It's been really powerful. And then, of course, feedback from anybody listening as well really helps when we get it. But oftentimes when you do stuff like this, it's like speaking into a black hole. And that's what I found, is I wanted the feedback. And so, you know, Ray and Amber, you two are fabulous and have helped me so much. But I found with previous iterations of podcast and when I'm guests on other podcast episodes, like, you don't actually get a bunch of feedback, and you certainly don't get useful feedback that you can trust from listeners. Largely because the people who do respond, it's often going to be the same type of person who likes to respond, which is wonderful. But they're not, and you don't get a lot of that. I mean, it's kind of just like, hey, we're going to speak into this black hole, and we're going to hope that it's really helpful over time. And so I didn't find that useful for me as a tool for me to get better and figure out what I'm thinking better. But with you two, I do. So thanks, I guess. It's an opportunity to thank you.
That's a hallmark card if I ever heard one.
Yeah,
Thanks,
there you go.
Comma, I guess.
So thanks. Thanks. Just wasn't gonna thank you, but at the end of this, I feel like I kind of should. So
why not?
You know,
Why
yeah,
not just
it's
thank
fine.
somebody?
Yeah.
Done a good job, Jonathan, and you've been audible as hell. It's just so audible.
You know what they say? If all else fails, turn the microphone around. That's what they say. That's what they all say.
There's a quote card. We don't do quote cards anymore, but if we did, I
should.
would turn that into one.
When do you have any examples of teaching something as you were learning it as a way to learn it better? I'd love to hear
every single professional certification that I've gone through. Chapter 1, I go on the internet and I try to teach chapter 1. Chapter 2, I go on the internet and you can, if you delivering the information, right? Mm-hmm. So when I was going through corrective exercise, a lot of my content was about corrective exercise. I didn't realize that what I was learning wasn't as applicable to my market as I thought. But I would go online and teach it, man. They weren't reels back then, but back in the day, you do a 3-minute video, landscape style on the internet, and try to go to rev.com and do your captions yourself. So the olden days when it wasn't just an app. But I've done that every single certification that I've gone through. If you look at my content for the past probably 5 or 6 months, it's all menopause content because I went through 3 different menopause certifications. And if I may say this, Jonathan, because I think this is really important, for those of us in a community, we know that when we go through professional certifications, a lot of the language and is jargon. Like either it is language that's written for people who understand the science, or it's just simply, jargon. And what you can benefit from by teaching this stuff to the community that follows you is you find out how to quickly and easily translate it into layperson's language, right? That's one of the biggest benefits because all the analogies that I use are just me struggling to figure out how do I take this statement about the follicular phase versus the luteal phase of a menstrual cycle and make it something that's easy to explain in a way that, so this is your daytime cycle when this happens, this is your nighttime cycle, night and day never meet, right? You might feel a little crazy during the night, but you might feel a little normal during the day. If they start to blend, you might have some hormonal issues, right? That's a simple way for me to explain something that's explaining complexity through the science, but people just never get it. So I benefit so much from making the attempt to boil it down to something that makes sense for the person who's not in our industry. And that has benefited me so well in conversations and in my ability to present the information to layperson populations in when I'm invited to talk about things.
Right.
So, man, it's been super helpful for me.
It's like,
but I learn faster that way. Because I got to explain it to somebody else.
Well, when you teach it, your brain switches gears, right?
Yes.
Like there's a totally different process when you're trying to teach yourself versus when you try to teach someone else.
Yes.
We see this with our OTA mentors, right? So for the Online Trainer Academy, we have the option to upgrade to one-to-one mentorship. And the mentors that we hire are great at what they do, but they get exponentially better in their own business because they have to teach it to someone else.
100%.
It's just you get out of your own head because you laser focus because you're helping someone else. And you just think a little bit more clearly and without all of the extra noise. And so we see that with them pretty frequently. Like they're like, oh man, because I've been doing this for several months, like I'm helping them. But also like my stuff's a lot better now too.
Yes, that's 100% accurate.
Yeah, when you get out of your world, I mean, that's another part where obsessive narrow-mindedness on your own industry can be really damaging, is you start to believe that, like, the things that things are called matters, and they don't. It's the Richard Feynman, famous story about the bird when he was teaching. He's like, I don't give a shit if you know what the name of the bird is. I care about whether you know how it interacts with the ecosystem and what impact that gives. I'm like, that's what matters. That you know the name of something. And that's often a crutch of where it's a way to identify in yourself whether you understand something or not, are you defaulting to fancy jargon, or are you able to explain something simply? If you're defaulting to fancy jargon, you probably don't understand the thing, but you're trying to protect against accepting that by using some sort of complicated jargon. Well, thank you for indulging me in this. I circled a couple things to improve on that as I was going through that section. Not completely done yet, but I'm happy with it. That's the final like net new kind of scary thing that I needed to read and make sense of. So that's like 3,000 and some words. I probably wrote about 8,000 words on that and pared it down. So there's a lot a lot of work went into that. I hope it made sense. And thank you for listening to the podcast as always. And especially if you stuck with me through the whole microphone gate of 2023.
Is that what we're naming this episode? Microphone Gate?
No.
That's awesome.
But it's a part of it.
Oh, man.
If you are looking for another episode to listen to, I'm going to recommend you check out episode 123. This is called The 4 Big Buckets of Wealth Management. And this is an example of me teaching something that I was learning. And so it's not financial advice, but what I do is I share with you exactly how I think about and manage my own finances in a lot of detail. Like I tell you exactly what I do. I tell you exactly what I've invested into and what our corporate structure is and all that. But also, and what I think is actually probably more important and perhaps more interesting is philosophy towards how I think about money and how I think about my family's wealth and how that has changed a fair bit. So that's episode 123. Hope that you enjoy it. And as always, thanks for listening. And it's time for me to eat.